Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Amir Pasic. I am the Dean of the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, and we are happy to welcome you to the third annual Milton Murray Lecture, where we are welcoming Luciana Bonifacio as our lecturer this year. And I want to thank the Milton Murray Fund and Cara Rochelle, who's representing it here today, for making this possible. So Luciana recently stepped down as Chief Development Officer at Save the Children. In this role, she led the organization's effort to mobilize private support for domestic and international programs. Under her leadership, private support from foundations, corporations, and major donors grew exponentially to over $200 million a year. A firm believer in the power of private philanthropy, Luciana established partnerships with Fortune 500 companies such as Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, Starbucks, and the Walt Disney Company. She led a $100 million capital campaign and engaged coalitions of philanthropists to advance social impact. As chair of Save the Children's Global Corporate Partnerships Group and the organization's Global Partnerships and Philanthropy Leadership Group, she promoted best practices to increase private donor engagement throughout the global organization. With over 25 years in the nonprofit field, welcome, come on in, join us. With over 25 years in the nonprofit field, Luciana has firsthand experience navigating the sector's evolution. She has been interviewed for insights on partnerships and philanthropy by media outlets such as the Chronicle Philanthropy and Nonprofit Pro. She is an official member of the Forbes Nonprofit Council and has contributed as a panelist with the Association of Fundraising Professionals, the Yale Social Impact Conference, Principal and Partner New York Family Office Forum, and more. Born in Argentina, Luciana earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Buenos Aires and began her career in the fashion industry. Luciana, thank you for being here. Please join me in a warm welcome for Luciana.
It's so great to be here with all of you today. So thank you for having me. Many thanks to Amir for inviting me to be here today and speak with everybody, and to the Milton Murray organization for making this lecture possible. I thought, given where we are in this moment in philanthropy, and given that after 25 years I just stepped down from the role, it was a really good time to take a moment and look back, look around, and look forward. So I'm going to start with a look back, right? So look back 2000 to 2025. And what are those big milestones, those big moments that really marked special moments in philanthropy and how giving has been taking place? So it happened to be that 2000 is a year when the Gates Foundation was established. So that's one big moment, right? And like we can always see a lot of like nodding. The foundation clearly has made a mark on what it means and how you give. So one big moment, right? Around 2005, I feel like there was a moment when a lot of corporate philanthropy is taking center stage. You have Michael Porter on the share value concept, right? So this idea that companies and nonprofits can work together in a way where there's more of an equal point of view on how you both work together towards a goal. That year also Bono launches Product Red, and now you have corporate social responsibility everywhere, very visible, iconic, right? So again, it's the idea that companies are doing good, that I can buy a product that will make me feel better. Just the next year, the concept of B Corps comes around. And it's in 2007 that about 80 companies are already certified B Corp. So it feels like at that moment, it's all about companies, corporate engagement and doing good. By 2010, the Giving Pledge is established. Now we have, in the individual philanthropists really stepping up with this idea of like hope, and I want to give back, I want to do something meaningful during my lifetime. So really feels like it's building a lot of momentum. By 2015, it's the Mark Zuckerberg initiative that gets established. And while it may not be the first philanthropic LLC, I think it's the one that often comes to mind as this idea of thinking about philanthropy now in more business terms and a more flexible way of what does it mean to give, how to give. So that starts happening. Soon after that, I think it's 2016, it's 100 and change, big bets, right? And soon after, audacious, the next big bet. So it's really pushing now for like this big thinking. We're gonna solve the problem. We're gonna absolutely eradicate this issue or eliminate this other thing. I'm gonna do it big. So you get that, right? And then 2020, Mackenzie Scott starts making her big gifts trust-based, really turn things upside down on how you give, how you decide. There's no proposal. She's deciding who to give to, right? So when I look at, well, I'll talk later about what happens in 2025. But as I look back, right, I think those first 15 years, there's a lot of optimism. We're building big things. We're committing to doing things in a different way and doing them big. And after that, when you start with the LLCs and the big bets, by the way, mix through all of this, but it's harder to put a specific date to them. The effective altruist model, right? Add that throughout. Donor advised funds, localization and criticism of the role of the nonprofit sector in a decolonization approach, right? So I think by the time the LLCs and effective altruists and social ventures really start taking shape, it becomes much more complicated to identify the specific role of the nonprofit sector and how you're going about implementing change. So it became harder. I think it really became a lot harder to do that. What did not change throughout all this time was the importance of the work and the role of the communities implementing the work. So this image is Yegben is a colleague from Save the Children in Ukraine. This image happened when he was filming for us. Like we had asked, it was my last project at Save the Children, was to put together a documentary about our work in Ukraine and what did it mean to be a humanitarian worker in a war zone. He was filming for us when missiles started falling, so he's covering his ears because of the sound. What it means to be a humanitarian worker in situations like that is that you're making sacrifices all the time, right? He had to move his bed to the corridor of the apartment because you want to have many walls between the outside and where you're going to sleep so that there's some protection for you. In some areas that he has to go and visit, there's the possibility of unexploded devices on the road. And as minimal as it sounds, they put the bulletproof vest on the seat. So it provides some degree. It won't do anything for any major, right? Unexploded device, but for some ammunition, it can provide some level of protection. So I think about him and the decisions he's making every day in his work. In Kentucky, I met a principal that was so committed to his students that not only was he the principal, he was also the bus driver. And he would drive around the community to make sure that children were making it to school every day because he knew the families and he could go and be present and be like, come on, like, Johnny needs to come to school, right? And in South Sudan, I met child advocates that were working to really make sure that their friends were not getting married off. And they would go and they would talk to the parents and they would talk to the government officials and they would come together as a group to say, you should not marry her. So when I think about all of them, I think they are the heroes. We fundraisers, administrators, people that work in organizations that are not the ones doing the direct work. I see us as facilitators. They are the people we need to be focusing on. But so we come to 2025, and what happened in 2025? We get this big black hole because USAID is no longer around, absorbed by the Department of State in some capacity with a revised set of goals and budget. A lot of funding has been removed from the system. And so what do we do now, right? How do we move forward in this situation? And so I like to think about it this way, right? To process the moment is to accept the new reality, acknowledge where we could have done things a different way, where we can do better, and act on what we can control. So I'll go one by one on what I mean by this. So the first is on accepting the new reality. I feel we've been going through a process of grief in the sector, right? It's like, it's denial, it's this cannot be happening, we need to get some of this money back, how could you? Is the patient coming back? Did they just lose an arm, but they're still walking? Or I think by now we're at the point where we simply need to accept that the reality as we knew it is no longer, right? USAID, for all intended purposes, is not going to be what it has been. And to top it off, foreign aid in general is also changing because other governments are also slashing their foreign aid budgets. Mind you, there's a bit more thought going through that process, some advance notice so organizations can plan, but it's happening. So the way we work, the funding we're going to have to do our work is going to look completely different. Now, because I am an optimist, I also need to always look for the positive in all of this. The one positive thing I can get of this change is that for large organizations that depended heavily on USAID, the organizations were built around that as the primary donor. And USAID is a very prescriptive donor. And you will get this very detailed request for proposals that you have to respond to, which meant organizations build their teams around the capacity and the skill set to respond to very prescriptive RFPs. It's the equivalent of build me a chair that looks like this versus build me something comfortable to relax on for a little bit, not for the entire night, something for a little bit and see what you can come up with. So I think as organizations, some of us let that muscle, that creative muscle and flexible muscle sit a little bit. And this is an opportunity to say, no, we have an opportunity to rethink how we do our work and how do we respond to any of the needs we see in the social sector, irrespective of the funder. So I think we're going to get organizations acting in a more nimbly. So I like thinking about that. Then we get to acknowledge where we can do better. One is that being more flexible in how we think, for sure. But next one, this report from the school. So I find this report fascinating because there's one part of the data that is shared in the report that I think is what I've seen most in any news articles speaking about the report. And it's the positive part of the story, which was that nonprofits are trusted more than the government and the Supreme Court and corporations, right? So it spoke about that. And then I went back to it and I was like, wait a moment, I think we had a problem that we didn't focus on myself as a nonprofit sector, right? Yes, the reporter spoke about the fact that a lot of people don't really know if the nonprofit sector, what kind of impact we're having. But the question was, thinking about the nonprofit and philanthropic sector overall, do you believe things are headed in the right direction, or are they off on the wrong track? And of all the people asked, only 17% thought the nonprofit sector is in the right direction. I feel like we need to dig into all the other people that don't think that, to understand why. What is it that feels so disconnected for people, right? Because that's probably what gave a lot of the space for the sector to be criticized, right? I think all of us in philanthropy never felt we had to defend what we do and why we do it. We thought everybody believed in it and understood how important and positive it is. And I don't think that's what we're seeing now. When we speak with that 17%, we all feel great. But what's happening with the rest? So I think that's something we need to identify. We could have done better, is to have more conversations with people that did not necessarily see our work as positively as we thought of our work. And so we can act on what we can control. And if you're anything like me in fundraising and philanthropy, you've been asked to go find the money, right? It's government funding is gone, so let's replenish with private funding. Go find it. And yes, there's private funding out there that has not yet been mobilized and can be mobilized. But I don't think we should be thinking that we're just going to replace one for the other. And even though funding is out there, we also need to make sure we use this model to rethink the sector, rethink how we're structured internally, how we're working across the sector, and how we are providing our response. But if we are going to focus on the one part about finding the money, what does that look like, right? This is some information from Candid. When you look at the mix of revenue to the nonprofit sector, and I actually had not realized until very recently how much funding is coming from earned income versus actual donations, right? But if you start thinking about it, then it makes sense, because you're like, okay, academic institutions maybe get a fund, hospitals, the YMCA, Goodwill, right? Like, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. So there's a lot of money coming from earned income. You have the government grants, which is, of course, more than USAID, right? You can have Head Start funding, all kinds of things. And then you get that contributions portion. Within the contributions, which is the part we're all being asked to grow, where does it come from? So corporations, and who should we target in this moment, right? Corporations at this moment, what I am seeing is that they are being hesitant right now. They are themselves trying to understand what the current environment means for them, where they can play safely, and where they are going to get in trouble. So while I personally have seen companies do amazing things, this is probably a moment when companies are going to play it safe, stay with existing donors and within like a manageable space. Request goes with individuals, so we can talk about all of it as well. Foundations, I've seen very little movement on the foundation space. The Gates Foundation, so delighted that Bill Gates made the decision to announce that he's going to more quickly spend down the foundation. That is the type of energizing statement that I know I needed to hear when it came out. So that's one fabulous positive example. The only other one that comes to mind in a positive way or at least that stands out for me, was a group of foundations coming together to try to fill the gap on news reaching rural communities, right? That felt very relevant and an appropriate move from the foundation space. Other than that, they are very much making the case that they are not going to fill the gap of government funding, right? So again, I think there's going to be opportunities on the foundation space, but I'm waiting for like what's the next big thing coming there. Individuals, that's where I'm seeing more of the opportunity for all of us. Now that said, you all know, probably more than anybody else, that it's less donors giving more money, right? So there's still something that I want to talk more about. But individuals have the capacity, they have the freedom at this moment to be more flexible with to what they give and how they give. So I would definitely focus there. Personally, I would focus in particular on women because I think women will inherit, you know, in addition to their own wealth that they build, they are going to be inheriting before the next generation. And we're all talking about the next generation, but the spouses that have a longer lifespan are going to inherit first. So I think there's more there that we will really be focusing on. But the question is, how do we get more of those individuals to give? And those that are giving, how do we get them to give more? My feeling is that to do that, we need to reclaim optimism and joy in giving. My sense is that there's a sense of paralysis, even from the people who have the means to give and the inclination to give. Not only have we seen less people giving, right? But those who give, many of them have put their money in their donor advice funds. That's about 250 billion sitting in donor advice funds. So they made the decision that they want to give, but they are not feeling motivated to move their money from the DAP into a lot of causes or organizations. So something's stopping them from that next step. Similar, a lot of people signed the giving pledge, but not all of them are fulfilling the pledge at the speed or scale that you would expect to see, right? So there's something happening about slowing the progress. And again, this is my hypothesis, is that this paralysis comes from feeling uncertain about where to go. And not because you don't know who is out there, but because there is a sense that people may be inadequate in their decision making. Because just as we were saying, all these giving mechanisms kept changing and they became more business-like, and you have the effective altruism model and the big bet, then you start wondering, is my thinking as a philanthropist, am I thinking big enough? Am I being strategic enough? Have I analyzed this enough? Will this like stand up to what my peers would think I should be doing? And all that questioning and all that challenging is adding so much pressure that people just stop simply enjoying doing something good and positive and knowing something good will come out of it, and are spending a lot of time questioning themselves. I think that's why we're also seeing more donor collectives, because there's a little bit of pressure that comes off if you're in this group thinking, and now other people think the same, and we're all doing this together. I think it helps take some of that, again, I call it paralysis. And I also think the other thing that we need to work on is on the messaging around how people should think about the nonprofit sector. I think there's an expectation that the nonprofit sector will solve big problems fully. this idea that I'm sure we've all had conversations where people say, like, well, you're asking me to give money to support this campaign to end hunger. I gave 5 years ago, and this is still happening, right? And it's like, yes, of course it's happening. So how do we right-size the expectation of what the role is and what's acceptable levels of progress versus misplaced expectations? So I think there's something about microdosing the progress, or moving down from this idea of the big bet and massive change to say we can make this change. Like, even, was it last week or this week, that World Central Kitchen set up in DC to feed poor employees, right? I thought it was wonderful, right? And it wasn't, we're going to end hunger. It's like, we're going to feed these people, these workers that are not getting enough right now. And that felt neighborly, right? It felt positive, it felt achievable. So I think there's a lot about that, about joy and optimism. So I'll close with this recapping, right? And I added a fourth. So accept the new reality, acknowledge where we fell short, act on what we can control. And the smiley of joy is about, there was this one research where students were given $5 and students were given $20, and half of each of them were told, use this money however you want. On the other half of them were told, you have to give it away. Those who gave it away reported feeling much happier than those that kept the money. And it didn't matter the amount. So again, on this idea of microdosing and moving from grief to joy, I think it's important that we all start, even with ourselves, taking that little step that peels back that enormous magnitude idea of what philanthropy should be, and just doing one small little thing and inviting others to do one small little thing and reclaim that positivity.
I'll join Luciana to begin our conversation, and I'm sure there's lots of questions. I love the humility and the joy together and fun. So lots to think about there. So you thought about these big bet ideas. So do you think this big bet is not serving us very well? It creates too high of an expectation, solving things up very thoroughly.
I have mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, I love that we're challenging ourselves to think really, really big, right? And to say, well, let's put a lot of energy towards trying to move this forward. But I do at the same time think that it made it so big, so unachievable. Well, the nonprofit sector is very difficult, right? Like a lot of groups will apply for one of these big bets with very little minimal chances of getting the funding, right? So it's hard. I wonder, and these are all like my musings, right? I have no data behind this, but I wonder if some of the reasons too that for some of the people that stopped giving is like, oh, there's other people doing these big things. What does my $5 just matter, right? So I'm glad it's happening, but I think we need to be very careful what type of message is it sending. So,
how did it work at Save the Children? Did you have to modulate the ambitions depending on the size of the donor? How did you work there?
When we were submitting proposals or trying to engage, yeah, for sure. We adjust based on what we think somebody's capacity and propensity and likelihood of want to give. Of course, we want to make sure they were thinking about us at a scale that we felt was relevant to the impact we could have. And sometimes the conversation was not about, well, how much are you thinking? It's more about what level of impact do you want to have, right? So then we could figure out what to present in order to have that impact, but of course informed with a bit of data on like what, if the donor wanted to do something that's clearly not going to be within their means, then we need to manage that too, right?
You also talked very nicely about the hesitancy that people have in terms of giving, because there's all kinds of factors. Maybe they feel they can't make the difference, and other reasons that they're reluctant to give, and there is so much capacity. What are some examples that you have had in terms of overcoming some of that hesitancy?
Well, I'll also speak about some of the hesitancy we heard not that long ago. With all the USAID cuts, I think we had donors wanting to fill the immediate gap, right? And they were prepared to do that. But at the same time, they wanted to understand, I may give you a gift now, and I will be ready to give you another gift, probably a larger gift, once I understand what your long-term strategy is. Because they wanted to make sure that they were not just there to band-aid it, right? But to figure out the way forward. So I think that the process there is to overcome it, is to show them the vision and the direction, so they felt part of something they can really believe in, right? So I think it's having those conversations. We were talking to donors, for example, about how Save the Children was considering the future, and how we were working together with other peers to reconsider new structures where we could share some resources, share perhaps the monitoring and evaluation plan, share how we deploy global staff. So these ideas, having those conversations with donors when we explained this is how we're thinking about the future, started to also make them much more interested in engaging and considering the next gift.
And so is there more collaboration across organizations in this current environment than we would have seen in more normal times?
I think right now some of the organizations are coming together very much to have those types of conversations. I would say for Save the Children, we were absolutely doing that, coming together and discussing. I think it's very important at this moment that nonprofits do that on a personal level. With my peers across the sector, we actually have a peer group that we've established to talk about all the different fundraising challenges and successes, so we can compare perspectives and push each other. So that type of collaboration has been happening, and I think it needs to continue to happen, particularly at this moment. I think if you go it alone, this is not the time to go it alone.
Definitely. And you spoke a little bit about the role of women, because they'll be inheriting a lot of this menu transfer, but you've also had some unique success with engaging women donors that Save the Children.
Yeah.
You can speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, I absolutely love that initiative. So at Save the Children, we established a group called 100 Strong, and it is women philanthropists. And these are women that made a significant commitment. That's like a six-figure commitment, mid to high six-figure commitment to be part of the group. They can give to anything that speaks to them within the work of Save the Children. But the work is, the group is set up in a way that really builds community. What we found was that many of these women, while they were philanthropists themselves, perhaps they were able to build their own wealth. They didn't necessarily come from a group that already had this wealth for some of them. So perhaps their group friends and their family friends well, not the people they would have conversations about philanthropy. So having a group of similarly minded and similarly financially able people that could make similar commitments was important for them to build community. And they were also looking for opportunities to give back beyond finance and to learn and engage. So it was a lot about organizing really interesting conversations for them with people that would spark intellectual thinking, right? Whether it was like Nick Crystal, or our CEO, we had the First Lady of Sierra Leone speak with them, and then they were also able to receive training on how to be a mentor, and they were able to mentor Save the Children staff.
Oh.
So it was also another way to engage in a very personal way for them. And then after they heard the First Lady of Sierra Leone talk about her personal experience, when as a child she was almost married off, it really resonated with them. And so we spoke about our work around child marriage, and they got very excited. It was the first time that the group of women decided to join forces and fund a project together. And so we funded work in Sierra Leone side by side to the efforts of the First Lady. And it was extremely well received. There was so much about the program that I absolutely love. But they traveled to Sierra Leone because before they traveled, the First Lady was able to pass a law to criminalize child marriage in Sierra Leone, and she credited Save the Children, by extension, these women, for supporting her in that journey, among others, by the way, but she didn't credit it. What I love about what the First Lady of Sierra Leone did, by the way, is because we all know you can put a law in the books and things stay exactly the way they were, except it's now not technically legal, but no changes happening. She actually put some very interesting ways about it, where if you attended the wedding of a minor, you could be criminalized. You would be, if you married off your daughter, you would be fined. As a child that was married off, you could claim that the marriage be annulled. Like, she gave all these like extra things so that it would really have actual change, right? So it's and all that. Listen, the First Lady, of course, her excitement, she would move mountains, but having all these phenomenal women come together, feel excited, fund this work together, and see it come to life and have true impact, and was a phenomenal, absolute milestone for all of us.
And the idea wasn't at the beginning that they would do projects together, right?
Right. We had thought when we were forming the group, we had asked the board members that were working with us in setting it up if we should do it that way, that it would be one common thing, or if it should be even a topic like gender equality, right? Like women and girls. Like, should we do something that has to do with women? And the feedback was no. Each one of them had different things that spoke to them. What they wanted was community. So we decided not to do that. I was like, okay, anything you want. You can get mission support, you can support our work in the US, you can support emergencies, but there's a certain degree of your financial commitment. And then we have all these opportunities for you to make your engagement more real, right? More opportunities.
So this engagement with the First Lady of Sierra Leone, that kind of evolved organically, right? Is that?
Yeah. It started with inviting her to share her perspective with the group, and then it snowballed from there.
And how many women were in this circle?
There are about 68 at the moment. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And were they previously involved with Save the Children, or is this also a way of recruiting?
Some were already involved,
yeah.
And this was an opportunity for them to increase their engagement. And some were new and were recruited by other members. to say, I think you would really enjoy this. I think you should do this with us. So it's been both. Mhm.
And were they all from the United States, or was it a global group?
So this is data from the United States. However, over time, we started expanding to the UK. So now we have some members in the UK as well that are part of the group. We had to adapt it a bit to a different context because giving levels may look slightly different, right? But it still had to have that level of ambition. So it remained relevant and it felt just as special to be part of the group in the US or the UK. We were talking about other opportunities to expand in Asia, with discussions in Italy. So I think it's probably going to continue growing. It's by far one of my favorite initiatives at SAVE, donor engagement.
Now, the global aspect is very interesting. So you have your own international background. So how do you look at fundraising? How different is it in the United States versus international? What are the differences and similarities that you've observed?
Yeah. So I think some things are the same. Right? Things are the same. The expectation of the level of generosity in some places, like again in the UK, like some of the size of gifts we were talking about felt very, very high for that. So in some ways, adjusting some of that. But I think most of my focus that I would bring up in terms of working globally was when we were trying to roll something out that would be happening in multiple contexts, and we needed to bring everybody together to think about it the same way. So when we were working with corporations that perhaps wanted to engage with us in Bangladesh and in the UK and in the US and in whatever else, I'm making sure that the organization spoke the same language no matter where they were having the conversation, right? So you wouldn't want to have one country speak about a much lower level of overhead while somebody else is speaking about something else, or they would offer everything and everything, well, no matter what amount of money, because that's a lot in that one market, but they want to offer the globe. And so how did we bring practitioners together to work with a single language and plan? That's what I will bring up more. Then when it comes to Save the Children in particular, different markets worked in different ways. I think in Korea there was a lot more general unrestricted support coming through. And in Italy, everybody knows Save the Children, and so there are variations there on giving, but I think the biggest thing for me was whether organizations like Save the Children are speaking as one or as a combination of 28, right?
So being able to speak one language across the world, that must be quite a challenge, right?
Yes, yes, it is quite a challenge. It took quite a bit of work also because an organization like that in a federated model, you cannot force anybody to do anything. You need to get people to want to do things. So
you have to be a great diplomat.
Yes, a very great diplomat. But we do want to do this, right? Yeah. Bringing people along in a way that makes sense and they can see the long-term value of working together.
That's a wonderful skill to have, especially these days.
Yeah.
Well, we could keep going here by ourselves, I think, for a long time, but let's invite our audience here in the room and also online to ask Luciana questions and engage with her amazing experience.
Yeah, so I've been living and working in Asia, and one thing I found interesting in kind of working with nonprofits is that it wasn't as what I felt competitive in terms of fundraising. There was a lot of them wanting to work together kind of see could they fundraise together? Do they have like festivals of doing things together? And I wonder from your perspective, is it a very, it has to be a Save the Children project, or it has to be another kind of children's project, and you have to like identify separately, or if you can collaborate in terms of these big bet issues, or how you might vision that.
Yeah. So I've seen it both ways. I've seen situations where, as an organization, we were competing for funds. I've also seen situations where we partner up with other organizations to try to secure funding. We did a pilot at one point, the Global Emergency Response Coalition, and that was bringing together Save the Children here, Mercy Corps, World Vision, IRC, somebody out. It was a number of us to try to see if we could fundraise together in emergencies. So instead of every company getting 6 proposals, we would just get one. And I was in the management committee of that effort. The first year it worked well because some companies were very excited that we were trying this. So I think the first year worked well. Then there weren't a lot of big emergencies, so we couldn't activate for a while. And then there was another big moment when we were thinking, well, maybe if we activate together around the global hunger crisis, which we were not getting any traction for, can we try that together and see if we can mobilize people again? And in that particular case, and this was another learning, which is slightly different from your question, but connected. What we found was it didn't quite work. But in that case, it was because we were trying to use the Global Emergency Response Coalition name versus Save the Children, Mercy Corps, and people didn't know that name, right? So we would have had to spend a lot of money in marketing and explaining and all of that. So that was one where we tried it, and we're like, okay, we don't have the bandwidth or the money to build another brand, right? It's just us. Now, during the beginning of COVID, Save the Children was partnering with Feeding America to deliver food to children, right? And so we were fundraising together in that case. So that was an example where I would say worked really well. Like we were not doing hunger, they were doing hunger, we were doing other things. It was a good complementarity that made a lot of sense there. So that was a good one. So I think I've seen it both ways when it works, and then there are many times when we talk about it and we don't quite do it, right? So I have a full spectrum of that. I think we need to do more of it, and ideally with when we are complementing each other, so there's a clear reason why we're coming together, right? But yeah.
I'm curious on a personal / professional level. With such a wonderful career, what's next for you now that you're?
I don't know yet.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, I'm taking this moment. I think this has been a big year.
Yeah.
Right? There's been a lot, and I wanna replenish and figure out what I'm gonna do next.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you when I know.
Yeah, we would welcome you in Indianapolis, so
Okay.
consider it.
Please.
Nice to see you again.
Yes, I see you.
You Save the Children work in more than 120 countries, and Save the Children US is the most larger donor within Save the Children system. So I wonder how the geopolitical relationship among the US and other nations impact the Save the Children's US grants operation in other nations.
So the funding obviously, right, impacts everything. The geopolitical role of the United States separate from Save the Children, right? How are the changes there affecting global work? Is that?
Yeah.
Well, I think a little bit what we were discussing earlier, right? You and I were in another conversation, but building on that, the US in many ways sets the way that others may decide to follow or may decide to like go against, right? I think what we were discussing around the changes in foreign aid in other governments is in many ways a result of what's happening in the US, right? Because they are, one, there's perhaps permission to spend less on foreign aid, and two, they want to have more funding to increase their security budgets, right? So money is moving to other priorities. So in that sense, I would say it is affecting. Now, within an organization like Save the Children, when you have a lot of funding suddenly disappear, there is a concern to, when we work with communities, we're building trust with those communities. And anytime we make a commitment that we're gonna implement work, we're gonna be in this community, we're gonna do this at the hospital, we're gonna, whatever it is we said we were gonna do, then if you pull that back, it affects how they see you and whether you're gonna stand by your word and what you said you are going to do. Which in turn can affect, you know, your credibility, the trust in the organization, and I think the trust of communities for our organization is the biggest asset that we have, right? And it's been built over 100 years. So I think that was the biggest risk of all of this, is affecting the trust of the community in our colleagues that are out there doing the work. Right.
In your experience, what was your relationship with overseas development assistance agencies like for example, UNICEF or whatever?
For example, which one, I'm sorry?
UNICEF
Okay.
or the equivalent in African Union, you know, the ADB, they have one. Did you work with them?
Yeah.
Did you overlap with them? Was that impeding your work in a way? What was it like?
So I can speak to UNICEF, I can speak to some of the others, but yes, Save the Children does work with UNICEF a lot. I don't know that people realize how much all the organizations work together on the ground. There's actually quite a bit. And with UNICEF in particular, I would say the way we thought about our collaboration, in some ways, I can also, we put together the child's rights and business principles together with UNICEF and Save the Children. So we would come together with like papers and policies, right? So we do a lot of that work together. Then when it comes to implementation on the ground, often UNICEF would do, you know, like the first miles of work, and Save the Children would be like the last mile. So their work may be more at the regional center, at the hospital center, and our work would be at a little healthcare worker, small, you know, one person walking around the town distributing the vaccines, right, or what have you. So there was a little bit of again, complementarity on you do this part and then we do this part. Yeah, it's a great partnership. We do a lot of work together.
Any people online who want to chime in?
Someone asked what percentage of funds came from USAID or government that created impact in the wake of the cuts?
What percentage of funds came from the government, but then, okay, that were cut? I would say we had a cut of about 30% of our budget. Over 80 projects had to be terminated. The estimate by Save the Children is that about 10 million people will not be reached that we would have reached otherwise with our work. So the impact's been quite dramatic, I would say. That's the grief.
Right, Dana.
So I mean, I appreciated the acknowledgement of kind of what might be wrong with the sector. And and you mentioned that you're involved in some of these conversations about that. There's an international group called Reimagining NGOs, and it's focused on the role of INGOs, in different countries, and we call it Ringo. But one of the things they've been talking about is their relationship to local civil society groups, and how that could be envisioned. And I don't know if you've been a party to those conversations or if you had thoughts about kind of what the right role for INGOs would be in other countries and their partnership with local civil society groups.
So I have not been part of the discussions with this group you mentioned, but we had lots of discussions within Save the Children about that. I think when it comes to the Great Bargain 2.0, right, about like localization and really making sure that funds are going to local organizations, Save the Children has made a lot of progress on that front. And we've also done some surveys of perception from our local partners to see how do you see us? Are we a good partner? Do you feel like we have equal voice? Do you have so there's a lot of true commitment from the organization to move more in that direction. I think what we have not, I feel we have not properly articulated is why there's value in both. You do need the local organizations to be strong, to have the resources they can use, and they are doing phenomenal work, right? So that's extremely important and valuable, and I think giving also flexible funding for them is very important. That doesn't take away from the value of an international nonprofit, because I think what the INGO does is now you have visibility into how work is implemented in 100+ countries, and you have to be able to then add up all those experiences and identify, okay, here are some best practices that we're seeing across all the work everybody's doing. Here are some resources we can share, right? There's something about having that global view that you just want to have when you're focusing on this one area, right? You know that area really, really well, but there's that value that I think we need to do a better job at also speaking about why both are valuable and important.
Okay.
Last one. So I'm wondering, I want to understand, to learn your insights about bureaucracy in giant international organizations like Save the Children. Based on my own experience in Save the Children, because I also worked in the advancement team, I read a lot of proposals. I see like the program design of early child education or health, they are very similar compared to 20 years ago. So if you compare the program design with the local, local nonprofits, they are very creative, very innovative. But Save the Children, on one hand, you can see it's very consistent. On the other hand, I feel it's less creative. And because Save the Children is working in more than 120 countries, so usually like the headquarters in London or the regional office in Singapore would pose some very standard procedure to country offices, and we just slow down the country's offices like movement operation. So I want to understand your feelings and your insights.
Okay. Yeah, but this can be like a whole hour-long conversation. I think both are true. Okay. There are some things that the organization had identified as common approaches. It's like, okay, these are proven methods, this work. And so there are these common approaches that really the organization wants to make sure are used because they are tried and true and proven. Save the Children also sometimes has a lot of very creative things, and then we roll them out and let them be as their own. So, for example, establish the Humanitarian Leadership Academy, right? Which was talk about localization. It's about really building the capacity of frontline workers in various countries to be able to deploy themselves to emergencies. So nobody needs to be sent from overseas. I don't think anybody knows Save the Children created that, right? We created that. We just Seneca. We have a lot of centers doing extremely interesting, creative things, but I think we can be too humble. Can I still say we? Very humble about not making it about Save the Children, making it a public good, put it out there, let people do it. So I think that in some ways, Save the Children is much more creative than sometimes we ourselves talk about. There's been other innovations that I think have been good, like the catch-up clubs in education to help children gain a full year of education in just 3 months by doing very micro interventions. Those have been great, happening in 12 countries, need to be rolled out more. In other ways, there is sometimes a tension in a big organization, like say, where you sometimes might have conflicting views of what the best solution is for a particular problem, right? And those, yes, those are issues that as an organization will become sometimes difficult for the fundraiser, because the fundraiser is trying to figure out what's the best proposal to put in front of the donor. And sometimes you have two people with different ideas of what the proposal, the approach should be, right? We had one particular situation where the country office wanted to engage men in a child marriage program. Other people, the organization felt the focus should be on women. And so now I'll say, and I know it's been a bit, right, since you were at Save the Children in China, I think. Yeah. But I think over the past few years, the conversations we've been having at Save the Children was that if you have conflicting views, the country office takes precedent. So that has been, I think, very refreshing. And I think if you were, let's hope that if you were now there and that came up, you would feel it a little bit different. Because it's been more about like, we need to listen to that more than the headquarter view. So I would say the organization is, as any big organization, there are sometimes issues, right? But I think that the intention is very much about localization and listening to the voices of those closer. So I think it's all the right intentions and attitudes, and I'm seeing positive. I had been seeing very positive things happening in that direction, but there's always one for more.
It surprises me that headquarters doesn't always have the answers.
Yeah.
So let's allow Luciana to have the last word, and perhaps some of our students, especially those online, might be interested. But you can choose whatever you want for you to conclude, maybe with some thoughts about your career, which a future chapter is yet to be written. But you've so far had a very successful and impactful career. So maybe you want to share some advice with our students who would like to follow in the footsteps.
Great. First, it's been great spending the time with different members of the school and now with all of you. So thank you for being here. I think a career in philanthropy is a fabulous path to take. Even in this context, I think it is a really fabulous path to take. The people you get to work with are smart, they care, they're committed, so you're surrounded by people who wanna do well. I think what's helped me in advancing my career, and I would recommend for anybody to do this, is one is to push yourself to always try to expand your knowledge and how you're going about it and take on challenges, right? But the other one is to form a peer group, and ideally of people outside your organization, so you really have other voices, and figure out the right level of information you're comfortable sharing with people outside your organization, right? Or what levels of commitments you want to have with the group on how you're going to communicate. But to me, that has been very helpful. And sometimes also when things goes south on something, or you're struggling with something at your organization, to be able to talk to somebody in another organization, to feel like you're facing the same and how are you going about it, has been extremely helpful, rewarding, nourishing. It's something I would recommend for everybody.
Well, those are wonderful words to conclude with. Before we thank Luciana, I just want to remind you our next event will be November 10th with Marika Silver of the Lincoln Center at Newfields and on Zoom at 4:30. So please join me in a warm thank you to Luciana for a great evening.